Sir, that's my granddad's signature, Maid's daughter said. Billionaire's face went pale in shock. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's incredible story. The grand chandelier above sparkled, casting a brilliant glow over the luxurious mansion. This was a place where every surface gleamed with wealth and elegance. The floors were polished marble, so smooth you could see your reflection, and the walls were adorned with priceless works of art. The air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers, a stark contrast to the mundane life of a small, invisible figure in the corner of the room. Amelia Hayes, a 10-year-old girl, was not supposed to be here. Her mother worked as a housekeeper in the sprawling estate, and while she had learned to stay out of sight, her curiosity often got the better of her. She was supposed to be studying, sitting quietly in her corner, far from the world of the powerful people who lived here. But today was different. Today, she found herself watching a conversation that was not meant for her ears. At the long, polished dining table sat the billionaire, Mr. Sterling Gray, his sharp features softened only by the dim lighting. He was deep in conversation with his team of business partners, discussing an important contract that would change the course of his empire. Amelia's mother, Abigail, had warned her to stay quiet and out of sight, but Amelia could not help herself. The discussions of stock prices, investments, and deals were foreign to her, yet something about the words that flew around her caught her attention. Her mind, though young, was sharp, and she had a knack for details that others missed. She had always been quiet, observant, but it was her ability to pick up on the smallest details that made her different. Just as Mr. Gray signed a document, a particular detail caught her eye. The signature, one that had been scrutinized by everyone in the room, was oddly familiar. It was the signature of her grandfather. He had passed away years ago, but his handwriting was unmistakable. Amelia knew it instantly, even if no one else seemed to notice. Her heart raced as the words spilled from her lips, too loud for the room, but too important to ignore. "Sir, that's my granddad's signature," she said. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Mr. Gray's hand, poised over the paper, froze. His face turned pale as the reality of what she had just revealed sank in. The document, one that could make or break deals worth millions, had been signed by someone long gone, someone whose legacy was entwined with this very mansion. Amelia stood there, the quiet girl who had always been overlooked, now holding the key to unraveling a secret no one had anticipated. What did this mean for the billionaire, his empire, and the future of the deal he had just signed? No one knew yet, but one thing was certain. Amelia had just turned the tables on the world of power and wealth. The room was still, as if the very air had frozen in disbelief. Amelia's words hung in the atmosphere, lingering with a power no one had expected. Mr. Gray slowly lowered the pen in his hand, his gaze fixed on the document in front of him. His brow furrowed, and his face had turned as pale as a ghost. The business partners around the table exchanged uneasy glances, their murmurs barely audible, but the tension was palpable. No one knew how to respond. Here, in the quiet of the room, stood a young girl, small, seemingly insignificant in the grand world of business. Yet she had just exposed a secret that threatened to unravel everything. Amelia stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never spoken out like this before, never imagined that one sentence would cause such a stir. She looked around the room, seeing the shocked expressions on the faces of the billionaires and executives, their arrogance now replaced by confusion and fear. Mr. Gray, the man who had built an empire from the ground up, was no longer in control. He had always been the one to call the shots, the one who dictated terms. But now, it was a 10-year-old girl, the daughter of his housekeeper, who had just turned his world upside down. "Are you sure about what you just said?" one of the executives asked, his voice shaking. Amelia nodded. "I know my grandfather's signature anywhere. He was the one who signed that document years ago. He was part of this estate, part of your history." The room grew quieter. Mr. Gray stared at the paper in front of him, as if hoping the signature would disappear or that somehow Amelia was mistaken. But the truth was undeniable. Amelia had struck a nerve. The document, which was supposed to be a mere formality for a business deal worth millions, now carried a weight far greater than anyone had anticipated. The signature was more than just a name. It was a piece of history, a symbol of the past that no one in the room had taken seriously. "This can't be right," Mr. Gray muttered under his breath. "Your grandfather passed away years ago." Amelia stepped forward, her small voice clear and unwavering. "I know, but his legacy is still here. You can't just erase it." The silence in the room was deafening. Mr. Gray had spent his life building an empire on power, money, and control. But in that moment, he was powerless. The truth had been exposed, and there was no hiding from it. The contract they had been discussing, one that would have solidified his hold over the estate, was now in jeopardy. "What are you going to do about this?" one of the other executives asked, a hint of concern creeping into his voice. Mr. Gray took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. He looked at Amelia, then back at the paper. He was a man who never allowed anything to slip through his fingers, yet here he was, faced with the undeniable truth that he had overlooked. The signature wasn't just a legal formality. It was a connection to a legacy, a story that had been buried beneath the wealth and privilege he had surrounded himself with. I need to verify this," Mr. Gray said, his voice trembling. He turned to his lawyer, who immediately reached for the phone, dialing numbers. But Amelia knew that it would take more than just a phone call to resolve this. This wasn't a simple mistake. This was something far deeper, something that could change everything for Mr. Gray and his empire. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Amelia had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she had control. She had spoken the truth, and now the billionaires and business magnates who had once dismissed her were the ones who had to listen. She had disrupted their world, and she wasn't going to back down. The room remained eerily silent as everyone waited for Mr. Gray to make his next move. The tension was so thick that it almost felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Amelia stood still, her small figure framed by the grand, expensive furniture around her. She couldn't quite comprehend the magnitude of what had just happened, but she knew one thing for sure. She had just altered the course of a world she had never been a part of. The billionaire, who had always been the one to command attention, was now facing a reality he couldn't control. Mr. Gray stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the marble floor as he paced back and forth. His mind raced, trying to process the revelation Amelia had just dropped on him. The signature, her grandfather's signature, was no longer just a simple matter of a forgotten document. It was a key that unlocked a history he wasn't prepared to confront. He had to act quickly. "We need to get a verification on this immediately," he said, his voice shaky. The tension in his words was clear. One of his associates, a lawyer who had been sitting quietly at the back of the room, immediately pulled out his phone, dialing a number with urgency. "We'll confirm the authenticity of the signature," the lawyer assured Mr. Gray, but even he seemed uncertain of the outcome. Amelia's eyes remained focused on the room. She hadn't spoken since her bold declaration, but inside her, something was shifting. The small, scared girl who had once been invisible now felt a growing sense of power. For the first time in her life, the adults around her, those who had always looked down on her, were the ones who needed her. They needed her to be right. The seconds dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Mr. Gray's hand clenched into a fist, his fingers twitching as he waited for the lawyer's call to go through. The room's earlier chatter had now been replaced by a thick silence, punctuated only by the occasional tap of a phone or the shuffle of papers. It felt as if everyone in the room was holding their breath, waiting for the truth to be revealed. The billionaire's face was now completely drained of color. He no longer exuded the confidence and dominance that had made him the center of power in this room. Amelia had taken that from him with a single sentence. "You can't erase history," she thought to herself, even though she didn't say it aloud. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the truth, a truth buried under layers of privilege and power that no one had bothered to acknowledge. The lawyer hung up the phone and turned to Mr. Gray, his face pale. "It's confirmed," he said quietly. The signature was authentic. Amelia's heart raced. The reality of the situation was sinking in now. Mr. Gray's empire, the one he had worked so hard to build, was based on a foundation of lies, of forgotten legacies that he had never bothered to respect. "I'm going to need a moment," Mr. Gray muttered, his voice hoarse as he sat down. The room was still. Amelia could see the fear in his eyes now. A man who had been so sure of his own power, now helpless in the face of something as simple as a signature. The others in the room looked at each other, unsure of what to do. This wasn't just a corporate scandal. This was something much more personal. It was a reckoning. "Amelia," Mr. Gray's voice finally broke the silence. She looked up, meeting his gaze. His eyes were no longer filled with the arrogance that had once defined him, but with something else, something closer to admiration. "I've underestimated you," he said softly. Amelia didn't know how to respond. She wasn't here for praise. She wasn't here to bask in the shock she had caused. She was here because the truth needed to be heard. And now, with the signature confirmed, the billionaire had no choice but to face it. The room was still, a silence so thick it seemed to weigh on everyone. Mr. Gray's face was pale, his usual confidence completely shattered. He had always been in control, the one who dictated terms, the one who called the shots. But now, the power had shifted. Amelia stood quietly, her small figure still at the edge of the room, but the change in the air was unmistakable. She had exposed a truth that no one had expected, and now, even the mighty billionaire had no choice but to confront it. He stared at the paper in front of him, the signature glaring back at him like a mirror to the past he had tried to bury. The room full of high-powered executives, who had once treated Amelia like she was invisible, now seemed to avoid her gaze, as if they too understood the magnitude of what she had uncovered. It was more than just a signature. It was the key to a story they had overlooked, a legacy they had ignored for years. Mr. Gray finally broke the silence, his voice shaky but still commanding. "I need to understand how this happened," he muttered, his eyes not meeting anyone else's. Amelia stood tall, her gaze unwavering. She had no desire for power, no desire to see this man brought down. She simply wanted the truth to be known. "This isn't just a mistake," she said, her voice surprisingly steady for someone so young. "You've built your empire on the backs of people who were here long before you. People who were dismissed, forgotten, and never respected. My grandfather was one of those people. And now, his name is part of something bigger than you ever realized." Mr. Gray looked at her, his expression unreadable. He could not deny the truth of her words, but that didn't mean he was ready to accept them. He had spent his entire life building an empire, controlling every detail, and now, it all seemed to be slipping through his fingers. Amelia didn't speak again, but her eyes stayed on him, steady and unblinking. She wasn't angry. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was simply standing in the presence of history, and it was undeniable. A few moments passed before one of the executives finally spoke up, his voice trembling. "What now?" he asked. Mr. Gray's eyes flickered to the others in the room. "We need to figure out what this means," he said, his voice stronger now. "But this changes everything. We can't just ignore it." The room erupted into a flurry of activity, people whispering to one another, glancing at the document, and discussing what steps to take next. But Amelia remained where she was, still as a statue. She could feel the weight of their words, the realization settling in that her small act of speaking up had created a ripple that would echo through their world. Mr. Gray stood up and walked toward her, his steps slow but deliberate. The other executives watched, unsure of what would happen next. When he reached her, he stopped a few feet away, his eyes studying her with something she hadn't expected, respect. "You've made your point," he said quietly. "You've shown us the truth. And I can't ignore it anymore." Amelia didn't know what to say. She wasn't here for apologies or recognition. She was here because something needed to be righted, and for the first time, it felt like it was being acknowledged. "I didn't do this for you," she said simply. "I did it because it's the right thing." Mr. Gray nodded, as if he understood now. He turned back to the group of executives, his voice firm. "We have a lot to work through, but this will be handled. We'll do what's necessary." Amelia watched as the powerful man, who had once been so dismissive of her, now seemed to understand the weight of her words. It wasn't about money or power, it was about the truth. And in that moment, she knew that no matter what came next, she had won. The room began to settle, the urgency of the situation slowly fading as everyone else turned their attention to the next steps. But Amelia knew that things had changed. She had made them see her. She had made them see the truth. And now, nothing would ever be the same. The next few days were a whirlwind for everyone involved. The billionaire's world, once unshakable and controlled by the power of his wealth, now seemed to be crumbling. Mr. Gray had promised that things would be handled, but as time passed, the weight of Amelia's revelation began to settle in. He couldn't ignore the truth that had been exposed, and neither could his team. The boardroom, once filled with confident discussions about acquisitions and mergers, had turned into a place where every decision felt uncertain. Amelia's presence was no longer a background detail. She was now at the forefront of a conversation that could change everything for Mr. Gray and his empire. Her quiet, steady voice had shaken the foundations of a world built on secrets. It wasn't just about the signature anymore. It was about the history of the people who had been forgotten, people like her grandfather, who had once been a part of this estate, shaping its past in ways that no one had ever acknowledged. Amelia had spoken up because she believed it was right, and now, even though the adults around her were scrambling to fix what had been broken, she felt a quiet sense of pride. She had made them see what they had been too blind to notice for so long. The day after the revelation, Mr. Gray invited Amelia and her mother to the mansion. It was a rare gesture, one that no one could have predicted. Amelia had no idea what to expect. As they walked through the grand entrance, past the towering columns and polished floors, Amelia felt the weight of the place. She had spent so much of her life trying to avoid attention, trying to remain invisible in a world that never saw her. But today was different. Today, her presence was being acknowledged, and not just because of the signature she had uncovered. Mr. Gray greeted them in the foyer, his usual stern demeanor softened, almost as if he had been changed by the truth Amelia had revealed. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. Amelia didn't respond immediately. She had never expected an apology. She wasn't here for that. She was here because the truth needed to be honored. "You've done something no one else has," he continued. "You've shown me that there's more to this place than what I've built. More than the money, the power, and the business." Amelia stood still, her gaze steady. "I didn't do it for you," she said simply. "I did it because it's right. You can't ignore the past. You can't just erase the people who made it possible for you to be here." Mr. Gray nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I understand that now," he replied, "and I'm going to make things right." The decision was made that day. The history of the estate, the legacy of the people who had worked for it, would no longer be ignored. Mr. Gray and his team began to work on plans to honor those who had been forgotten. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick, but it was a start. Amelia's grandfather's name would be etched into the story of this place, no longer buried in the past, but celebrated as part of its foundation. And as the days went on, Mr. Gray began to change. He no longer saw the mansion just as a symbol of his success. He saw it as a reflection of everything that had come before him. The people who had built it, the sacrifices they had made, and the legacies they had left behind. For Amelia, the change wasn't about the mansion or the recognition. It was about something more personal. She had always felt invisible, as if her voice didn't matter. But now, she knew that even someone as small as her could make a difference. And that was enough. As the weeks passed, things slowly started to change at the mansion. The once cold, distant atmosphere now felt different, more alive. The tension in the air had dissipated, replaced by a new sense of purpose. Mr. Gray had kept his promise. He had taken action to honor the people who had been part of the estate long before he had claimed ownership. It wasn't just about the history anymore. It was about giving those people the recognition they deserved. For the first time, it felt like the mansion was truly a place of legacy, not just wealth. Amelia's life also began to change. Her mother, Abigail, had always worked tirelessly as the housekeeper, trying to keep a low profile, always invisible in a world where the rich were the only ones who mattered. But now, things were different. Amelia had disrupted the status quo, and because of that, they were both being seen in a way they never had been before. Mr. Gray had invited them both to dinner one evening, a gesture that shocked Amelia. She had never imagined a moment like this, where someone with that much power would actually want to spend time with them. It wasn't out of pity or obligation. It felt genuine. As they sat at the grand dining table, the room filled with an air of respect. Mr. Gray, though still a man of power, seemed like a different person. He had stopped looking down on those around him and had begun to understand the importance of valuing every part of the estate, not just the profits it brought. During dinner, he turned to Amelia and her mother. "I've been thinking a lot about what you've done," he said, his voice softer than usual. "What you did wasn't just about uncovering a signature. It was about showing me that there is more to life than what I've been focused on." Amelia wasn't sure how to respond. She had never expected this level of acknowledgement. She had done what she thought was right, not for recognition, but for the truth. "I didn't do it for you," she replied simply, her voice steady. "I did it because it needed to be done." Mr. Gray nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I understand that now," he said, "and I want to make things right. It's not enough to just recognize your grandfather's contribution. It's about recognizing everyone who has worked to make this estate what it is, whether they were in the background or the forefront." Amelia smiled softly. It wasn't about the grand gestures, the titles, or the wealth anymore. It was about acknowledging what had been hidden for so long. As dinner ended, Mr. Gray stood and looked at Amelia. "I've already made arrangements to ensure that your grandfather's legacy will be honored. There will be a permanent exhibit in the estate dedicated to those who helped build it, and your grandfather's name will be there, right where it belongs." Amelia's heart swelled with pride. She had made a difference. Her small act of speaking up had led to something far greater than she had ever imagined. She hadn't expected anything for herself, but the recognition of her grandfather, the acknowledgement of his role in the estate's history, was all she had hoped for. As they left the mansion that evening, Abigail looked at her daughter with a mixture of awe and pride. "You've changed everything, sweetheart," she said, her voice full of emotion. Amelia didn't say anything in return, but as they walked down the grand hallway, she realized that she had finally been seen. She had finally made her mark on the world that had once ignored her. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. As time passed, the changes in the mansion were more than just physical. The air felt different, more open, as if the walls themselves were breathing new life. The once cold, rigid hierarchy had shifted. Mr. Gray had kept his word. The permanent exhibit dedicated to the people who had built the estate was a reality now, and Amelia's grandfather's name, along with many others who had been forgotten, was immortalized on a plaque. It was a small victory, but a powerful one. For the first time, people who had been overlooked were being acknowledged. The mansion had always been a symbol of Mr. Gray's success, but now, it was a place of history, a place where stories of those who had come before him were being told. The wealth and power were still there, of course, but it wasn't the only thing that mattered anymore. Amelia's life, too, had transformed. She had always been the quiet girl, the one who had to remain in the background, never seen, never heard. But now, she had a voice. And that voice had made an impact. The respect she had earned, not just from Mr. Gray but from everyone who had been part of the estate, was something she never expected. It wasn't just about being seen. It was about being heard, about making a difference. One afternoon, as Amelia and her mother walked through the estate's gardens, Mr. Gray found them. He had been working on a new project for the estate, something that would further honor its history, and he wanted to show them. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice thoughtful. "It's not enough to just recognize the past. It's about building for the future, too." Amelia listened carefully, unsure of where he was going with this. Mr. Gray continued, "I want you to be a part of that future. You've shown me that there's more to this estate than what I've built. You've opened my eyes to what it truly means to be a part of something, to contribute to something greater than yourself." He paused for a moment, looking at both Amelia and her mother. "I want to offer you something. A scholarship, a place to study whatever you want. This place, this estate, will help fund your education, your future. You've proven yourself to be someone who sees beyond the surface, who understands what truly matters." Amelia stood still, processing his words. She had never imagined this moment, this opportunity. She had never expected anything for herself. She had done what she did because it was the right thing to do, because the truth needed to be uncovered. But this was different. This was more than she had ever dreamed of. Her mother, standing beside her, looked at Mr. Gray with surprise. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Mr. Gray nodded. "I've seen enough. It's time to make things right, not just with the past, but with the future. Amelia deserves this." Amelia turned to her mother, her heart racing. She had always been the one to support her mother, to try to make things better for both of them. But now, for the first time, She was being given the chance to build her own future, to create her own path. I don't know what to say, Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible. Mr. Gray smiled. You don't have to say anything. Just know that your voice, your actions, have made a difference. And that's worth more than anything. The offer was more than just a scholarship. It was a symbol of change, of growth, of a future where people like Amelia, those who had been overlooked, who had been dismissed, could find their place in the world. The next chapter of her life was just beginning, and for the first time, Amelia knew she was ready for it. She had proven that even the smallest voice could change the world. As the days passed, Amelia's world began to transform in ways she never expected. The scholarship Mr. Gray had offered her wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol of everything she had worked for. The truth she had uncovered, the small act of speaking up, had not only changed the trajectory of her life, but had also shifted the direction of the estate. It felt surreal to her. A few months ago, she had been the unnoticed maid's daughter, blending into the background, just another figure in the shadows of wealth and privilege. Now, she was a person of importance, someone whose actions had made a real difference. Her mother, Abigail, was equally in awe of the changes. For years, she had worked tirelessly, enduring the cold treatment of the mansion's owners and guests. But now, she too was being treated with respect. Amelia could see the pride in her mother's eyes, a pride that had been absent for so long. Things were better for them both. The scholarship allowed Amelia to attend one of the best schools in the country, a place where she could finally learn and grow beyond the walls of the mansion. But it wasn't just the academic opportunities that excited her. It was the sense of purpose that came with the education. She wasn't just going to school to learn. She was going to school to make an impact. As the school year began, Amelia threw herself into her studies, determined to prove that the chance she had been given was not a mistake. But even in the halls of her new school, she couldn't forget where she had come from. Every lesson she learned, every opportunity she seized, was a reminder of the people who had made her journey possible. Her grandfather's name, now etched into the history of the mansion, was a reminder that no one should ever be forgotten, no matter how small or insignificant they seemed. One afternoon, as Amelia walked to class, she received a message from Mr. Gray. It was a simple text, but the words carried weight. I haven't forgotten the change you brought. We're working on more projects to keep the legacy alive. Keep doing what you're doing. It was a message of gratitude, of acknowledgement, and of a promise that the work wasn't done. Amelia smiled as she read it. The billionaire who had once dismissed her had now become an ally in the fight for justice. She wasn't sure where this new path would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer invisible. Her presence in the world had been made known, and now, her voice was a part of the larger conversation. The mansion, once a place of cold luxury and power, had transformed into a place of meaning. Mr. Gray had kept his promise to her, and in return, she had made him see the world through a different lens. There was still work to be done, still history to uncover, and still legacies to honor. But for the first time, Amelia felt as though she was a part of that process. She had sparked a change, and that change was still rippling outward, touching lives, creating opportunities, and reminding everyone that the smallest voices could make the greatest impact. As the years went by, Amelia found herself more and more at peace with the changes that had taken place, not just in the mansion, but in her own life. The scholarship had allowed her to pursue her dreams, but it had also opened doors that she never imagined. She was no longer just the maid's daughter. She was now someone with purpose, someone who could influence the world around her. Mr. Gray, once the embodiment of power and privilege, had turned into a supporter, a collaborator in her journey. The legacy of the estate that he had inherited was no longer just about wealth. It was about honoring the people who had helped build it, and through her actions, Amelia had ensured that the story of those forgotten individuals would never be erased again. With each passing day, she learned more about herself. She was more than just a student. She was a voice for change, a symbol of resilience. The confidence that had once eluded her now came naturally. She spoke up in class, in discussions, and most importantly, she spoke up for those who couldn't. Her experience at the mansion had taught her the importance of truth, of standing up when others turned a blind eye. She had seen what silence could do. It could perpetuate injustice, erase history, and keep people hidden in the shadows. But she had also seen the power of a single voice, no matter how small, to make a difference. One afternoon, Amelia received a call from Mr. Gray. He told her about an upcoming project, one that would involve her directly. It was a new initiative he was launching to further preserve the history of the estate, and he wanted her to be involved, to have a hand in shaping how the future would view the past. He said, "I want you to be a part of it, Amelia. You've proven that you understand what it means to honor history, to give voice to those who have been forgotten." The project was to create a new educational program aimed at teaching young people about the importance of history, not just the history of the wealthy and powerful, but the history of everyone. The workers, the builders, and the ordinary people who made extraordinary contributions. Amelia had never expected to be asked to help lead such a program, but she felt ready. This was the future she had always dreamed of, one where she could use her voice to create lasting change. She worked tirelessly on the project, collaborating with experts, historians, and even former employees of the estate. It was a long process, but with each meeting, each decision, Amelia felt herself becoming more confident in her ability to shape the future. The program was launched with great success. It became a beacon of education and opportunity, not just for the young people who participated, but for the community as a whole. The mansion, once a symbol of exclusivity, was now a place where stories of all people could be heard and celebrated. As Amelia stood before a group of young students, sharing the story of her grandfather and others who had built the estate, she realized how far she had come. She wasn't just the quiet girl in the background anymore. She was a leader, a voice for justice, and someone who had used her past to create a future where everyone's story mattered. The mansion had changed, but so had she. And as the years continued, Amelia knew that her journey was only beginning. The work she had started, the work they had all started, would echo through time, ensuring that no one would ever again be overlooked or forgotten. In this inspiring story of overcoming adversity, a young girl from a humble background reveals the power of truth and the importance of standing up for what is right. As Amelia uncovers a hidden family legacy, she transforms not only her own life, but the lives of those around her. From being the unnoticed daughter of a housekeeper to earning respect and making an impact, this is one of the most touching millionaire stories you will ever hear. The tale takes unexpected turns as Amelia gains recognition, proving that even those from modest beginnings can change the world. Witness how a single voice can alter the course of history and bring justice to the overlooked. Amelia's story highlights the power of legacy, hard work, and speaking the truth, making it a remarkable addition to millionaire stories. As she goes from being dismissed to becoming a leader, Amelia shows that everyone has a voice that deserves to be heard. This is not just about wealth, but about making a difference. And it's one of the most heartfelt millionaire stories you will encounter. Follow Amelia's journey from quiet determination to undeniable success as she inspires others to follow their own paths and make their voices heard in the world of millionaire stories.